Hidden Gems, Episode 38, Designer Spotlight on Inka and Markus Brand. Welcome to Hidden Gems, a board game podcast where we review unusual, forgotten, and underappreciated board games. We're your hosts. My name is Chris.
I'm Jason.
And this is Bill.
Thanks for listening to our show. Coming to you at 8:36 Eastern Standard Time.
Starting way late for this old man, for sure.
Just for reference, we all met at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, so if people haven't noticed yet, we've been playing around with our audio a little bit. Mm-hmm. We upgraded our mics recently. Not sure we've figured out how to use them yet properly.
Well, I thought last episode, given that all of you were remote, it actually came off remarkably well, even though I know you feel like it.
The last episode was recorded remotely because we had to record with Ghidorah, Chris K. And it took us about 2 hours to get everything set up. Yeah. I was about ready to just call it quits after that, but we made it happen, and it worked out.
We did. I'm pretty sure halfway through the recording, I somehow switched my audio from picking up through my mic to somehow through my monitor or something, because it sounds like I'm underwater for the second half of the show.
It's always Chris's fault.
It's always my fault, folks. I'm working on it. We're trying to make the audio sound better. It arguably probably sounds worse than it did in episode 1 right now, but we're working on it. We're trying to improve.
Bear with us.
Yeah,
we are not audio technicians, unfortunately.
Well, I have to say, after your last episode and given your track record that you're always making the next episode a little better than the last one, I feel like I got pretty big shoes to fill.
Theoretically.
Theoretically. The Ghidorah did a great job. It was just really interesting to hear his life story and where he picked up gaming in Korea and stuff like that. I thought that was super cool.
Yeah, it was really awesome having one.
Cool. Well, what have you guys been up to since the last episode?
Bill, what's been going on?
I just got back yesterday from Savannah, Georgia. Either of you guys been to Savannah?
Oh, yeah.
Once a long, long time ago. I need to go back, though.
I did a really cheesy historical ghost tour in Savannah when I was younger.
Yes, I did that like 10 years ago with our kids, and yes, I think they're still cheesy. This weekend, I went with my brother and sister-in-law, and it was their 30th wedding anniversary. And she actually put on her wedding dress, and my brother wore a tuxedo, and I met my wife at their wedding. So it was basically our anniversary as well. So I wore a tux, and my wife wore her bridesmaid dress, and we went out in the town and just had a blast.
Did you wear your pirate suit from Origins?
That's my next Savannah trip. I am going to wear that at a wedding because there's a friend of my daughter's who's getting married at the North Carolina Museum of Science on Halloween this year. And I'm coming back actually to film it. But she said in the invitations, I know this is Halloween, so if you want to come in costume, you could do it, but don't mail it in. You've got to rock it. So that's why I bought the costume at Origins. So I'm excited about it, other than the fact that it's wool and super hot. Yeah, it's going to be crazy. So the other thing I did to get a running start to go to Savannah, I drove up to Washington, D.C. to a little town called Vienna right outside of it.
Because that's on the way to Savannah.
That's on the way. So it's going to be the normal 5-hour drives. It turned into a 9-hour drive. But it was worth it because I went to see Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, which I'm a big fan of.
Yes, you are.
I am. It was a Father's Day present that my daughter Sarah bought me. So we went up and watched it, and it was awesome.
I feel like I should know what this is. And for other people who are out there who don't know what it is, like myself.
I didn't know either.
What is it?
I'm not an NPR listener. I'm just going to out myself right now.
Peter Sagal and Bill Curtis are the two hosts. It's kind of like a current events game show where there's really nobody who wins anything other than points. So they have 3 comedians. They ask them different kind of questions, and they respond in funny ways. So they have a segment of the show each day that's called Not My Job, and they'll get somebody famous to come on. And this time it was Eleanor Holmes Norton. It's a congresswoman from Washington, D.C. Well, because she's from D.C., they ask her things about the DC universe.
Oh, my wheelhouse.
Yes, there you go. So I'm going to throw down the gauntlet and see if you can
embarrass me.
Okay. Yes, I'm going to ask you the same questions they asked Eleanor Holmes Norton, and she got 2 out of 3 of these right. So,
oh my gosh!
So you've got to see,
Bill. I might cut all this from the show.
Nope, it's too late now.
That's right. Jason and I have noticed that if it's anything that embarrasses you, it somehow doesn't make it through. We'll ask Chris first, and Jason, if you feel like you have a better answer than Chris, then
there's no chance I'm going to know any of these.
Oh yes, there is a chance. There's a chance. Okay, here are the 3 questions. They're multiple choice.
I'm feeling super nervous. Multiple choice.
Oh,
okay.
Chris doesn't need the multiple choice.
Yeah, don't Don't give me multiple choice. Let me see.
No. You'll have to have the multiple choice.
Okay.
It's just part of it. So DC, of course, has a stable of lesser-known superheroes, including which one of these? And one of these is a real superhero that appeared in a DC comic. Mm-hmm. A, the Human Torch, but British. He was a walking flashlight. B, Interrupting Man, who had the power to show up anywhere at any time when someone else is speaking. Or C, Dog Welder. He would weld dogs to bad guys' faces.
No.
Totally true. So, credit to Peter Sagal. This is what he asked Eleanor, and she did the same thing. It's like, none of those are right.
Oh, wow. I'm going to admit, I do not know. For some reason, I'm getting some inclination towards B, although I'm not sure why, to be honest. It just seems somewhat familiar to me, the interrupting thing. I'm going to go with that.
I'm going to go with A.
A, okay. So Roxanne Roberts, I will say, in advice to Eleanor, she said, I would not go with Interrupting Man because that is every man.
Nothing unique about that.
Nothing unique about that. Well, you both got it wrong. It actually was Dog Welder.
Dog Welder is
who would
welds dogs
to bad guys' faces. And he was a good guy.
Huh.
That kind of sounds like, what's the guy in Watchmen? Rorschach. Dark superheroes. All right.
Real quick, I'll try to get through these quick.
I'm totally Googling this. All right. Anyways, hit me.
All right. In the late 60s, DC was owned by a company that would eventually spin out to become Time Warner. But at that time of the buyout, it was mostly focused on what other business? A, selling fake x-ray glasses. B, running very large parking lots across the country. Or C, running contract military operations for the U.S. military.
This isn't in a comic book. Oh my gosh, no idea. I'm going with parking lots.
I'm going x-ray glasses.
Chris is right. It was a parking lot.
Yes.
Good job.
Totally knew that.
All right.
Parking lot man.
Last question. DC superheroes get their power from a lot of different sources, like Superman from our sun. This villain, Snowflame, gets his power from what source? A, eating gasoline-soaked snowballs. Or B, doing cocaine. Or C, believing in himself. Gosh darn it.
Oh my gosh. I don't know this guy either.
I'm pretty sure these guys are way obscure.
I'm going gasoline-soaked snowballs.
That's what I would say, too. That seems more in line with DC.
Are you sure? Because we are in Washington, D.C. You may want to change your...
No, I'm sticking with it.
It was doing cocaine. Yes, isn't that crazy? Anyway, she got 2 out of 3, but she did have a little bit of audience help.
Dude, I do not know any of that. You stumped me, Bill.
What can I say?
Congratulations.
There you go. Well, this was for Chris K. when you put him on the spot, because Chris, you do like to put people on the spot.
I do.
Ask them questions. That was a little tiny payback.
If I'm going to dish it out, I have to be able to take it.
Right.
Well, that was very interesting, Bill. You always come on with the interesting out of left field topics.
Yeah, that's totally. At least it wasn't about psychology or podcasts.
All right. Well, what have you been up to, Chris?
Well, speaking of coming out of left field,
yeah.
You know what we need more of?
What we need more of, Chris?
We need more games about geese.
Yes. Snap my fingers.
That's right. I have 2 games to talk about today. Video games.
They're both about geese?
They're both about geese.
Awesome.
Oh,
I'm going to quickly talk about both of them. I played them both on the Nintendo Switch. Bought them on the eShop. One is called Mighty Goose, and the other one is called the Untitled Goose Game. Have you heard of Untitled
I've heard
Goose
of
Game?
Untitled Goose Game. You just run around being obnoxious to people, right?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about it in a second. But yeah. I think you would actually like it, Jason. So, Mighty Goose, really quickly. You play as a cybernetically enhanced goose bounty hunter.
Of course.
Of course.
Because the world needs more of those.
Yeah, you have mechanical arms. It's way over the top. If you're familiar with the game Metal Slug... No? Okay. So, Metal Slug is a side-scrolling, run-and-gun, bullet hell type game, basically.
Contra-ish, right?
Contra-ish, yeah. Where bullets are just flying all over the screen, Molotov cocktails flying all over the place. This game is heavily inspired by Metal Slug, for sure. So if you like that game, you would enjoy this game. I actually enjoyed this game quite a bit. It's a lot of fun.
Cool.
What makes it stand out from Metal Slug is really 2 things. Because there is just so much happening on the screen, it relies very heavily on a dodge roll mechanic, which I know doesn't sound very exciting, but when there are bullets literally everywhere on the screen, You have to learn how to utilize this technique just to survive. It basically makes you invulnerable. You can roll through damage.
That's the way Tunic works. I remember you still haven't tried that game.
I have not. Well, see, here's the thing.
You don't take my recommendations. It's okay.
I do, but I can't play Tunic because I have to play something that we haven't talked about on the show.
No, not true.
I'll get to it. So there's that, and then there's the Let Loose the Goose, which basically, once you've done a certain amount of damage, you activate this Goose Super Saiyan mode where your head catches on fire, literally, and you're invulnerable, and you're just raining bullet hell all over the place. It's fun. Mighty Goose. I recommend.
That is so funny because when you first said this, I thought you said geeks, but I guess you said geeks.
I said geeks.
I was snapping for geeks, but okay.
Yeah.
Goose, that's funny.
So the second one is Untitled Goose Game. So this is a puzzle game. When we talk about puzzle games a lot on the show, we've talked about The Witness, Goragoa, things like that. Mm-hmm. And this game is in that vein.
That is not what I expected.
Yeah, this is literally what it is. You play as a normal goose doing normal goose things. And this goose has a to-do list. So literally, you pull up a menu, and when you're in the level, you have a notepad that has a list of things that this goose wants to accomplish, basically. And all of them revolve around terrorizing humans, stealing things from people, annoying people, and describing it. I know it probably sounds like, how is there any game here? But it is actually harder than you might think. Otherwise, it is a puzzle thing. You got to get people to do things like buy back an item that they've already purchased, or have the goose get on television, for example. And you do that through three things. You can either honk at people, you can flap your wings intimidatingly at people, or you can pick things up with your beak. That's it. That's all you're doing. And you're trying to accomplish these tasks. Surprisingly fun. And my kids actually really enjoy this game, mostly because I think they enjoy harassing the people and honking at them and chasing them. They just think it's hilarious. But there is definitely a game here.
Oh, that's funny.
And a pretty good one.
That's interesting. I'll have to check it out. That was the main reason why I never checked that game out, because I thought it was just literally running around and annoying people. Yeah. And I was like, that doesn't sound fun. Yeah. But if there's actual puzzles to it, then maybe I'll have to check it out.
There is. Actually, Hayes was playing it the other day, and I had to help him a good bit. He was able to kind of figure out some stuff, but he needed help. It's not straightforward, what you're trying to do, for sure. The only downside, I'd say, for both of these games is they're maybe a little on the short side. So maybe wait for them to go on sale or something like that. But if you're looking to waste time on a weekend, Mighty Goose and Untitled Goose Game, that's not awesome. A bad way to spend it.
That's just terrible.
Nice. Well, in the name of games that are about birds, I actually played a game about a bird recently, too, called Death's Door. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one.
I think I have heard of this one.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a Zelda-like, sort of like Tunic, and you are a raven. You're called a reaper. You're in this weird netherworld where you're responsible for going through all these floating doors that lead to the real world, and you're collecting souls, basically. But something goes wrong in this world, and you have to figure out what's going on. Like the soul that you're trying to reap goes missing, and you have to try to figure out what happened to it. Mm-hmm. And so there's all these different levels and puzzles and tricky combat bosses and different things. So very Tunic-like.
Yep.
And not quite the same, but I'm not going to explain why, because it would give away interesting things about both games. So, but they each have their merits. I think I like Tunic better, but this one was also pretty good. Definitely worth checking out.
And what was it called again?
Death's Door.
Death's Door. All right.
Yep. But I know you'll never play it, so it's fine.
Maybe one day.
I was going to say, apparently he's into bird games, so he might do this one.
Cool. What do we got for a cocktail tonight?
So, as you could tell from the title of tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about the design team, the husband and wife design team of Inka and Markus Brand. And I thought it appropriate, since we were talking about the brands tonight, to do a brandy cocktail. So tonight, I made the guys a Brandy Alexander.
Tastes like a milkshake.
It does. A drink I've had many, many times. This drink is actually my go-to in the fall when we have drinks around the fire pit or outside. It's just great for that kind of thing. Or if you're inside around a fire, kind of cool weather months, awesome for that, I think. Also good with desserts, too. It's pretty sweet. Mm-hmm. It just has that autumny fall feel to it, you know what I mean?
It does. A little and thick.
A little bit and thick, for sure.
Does it have egg white in it?
Cream. I spared you the egg white. I know you don't like egg white.
I don't love it.
I'm trying to lay off.
I can drink it, but I don't love it.
Yeah, it's cream. So it's 1 ounce cream, 1 ounce creme de cacao. It's a liqueur you can easily find, and then an ounce of brandy. Shake with ice, strain into a chilled cocktail glass, and then if you're feeling fancy, you can top it with a little bit of nutmeg.
I see.
Bill loves his nutmeg.
I do love my nutmeg. Was it fresh?
No, it is not.
Oh, okay.
It is too late to be giving you nutmeg. What am I thinking? You're never going to make it. And heavy cream?
It's right here. I'll pass you my notes for the third game on here. So.
You're done for. All right. So as I mentioned, we're talking about Inka and Markus Brand tonight. And as we do on Hidden Gems, it's time for a little Hidden Gems book report.
Ooh.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the brands and their gaming history. So as I mentioned, they are a husband and wife team out of Germany. Inka was born March 19th, 1977, and Markus was born October the 1st, 1975. Before working in board game design, Inka actually worked in the hotel business in Germany. And Markus began working in schools with children with learning disabilities, which is interesting because if you recall way back when, Stefan Dora actually does this as well, and he is also a German board game designer.
Interesting.
That's kind of interesting. But he doesn't do that anymore. He actually has transitioned to work as an insurance salesman in 1997, and he still does that. Inka actually works on board games full-time now, while Markus still works, but that's kind of how they have it worked out between them. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, they have known each other from a very young age as they grew up in the same town, but they never had any interest in any kind of dating relationship growing up, at least through grade school and high school. However, you ready for this, Bill?
I am.
Years later, they were seated together at a wedding ceremony of two of their friends in 1999 because they were the only two single people there. That sounds familiar, yeah?
It does sound familiar.
I wonder if they were playing Paradise by the Dashboard Light.
If they didn't, they should have.
Bringing back good memories.
That is bringing back good memories. I tell you, if you have single guys, tell them not to go to a wedding if they don't want to get married. So,
that's awesome. I'm not even going to go there. I was going to... Never mind. Okay.
Some more harassment for me.
No, it's not. I was actually just about to say that I watched the Paradise by Dashboard Light by Meatloaf live in concert. Uh-huh. He is a weird dude.
He is a weird dude.
Just YouTube it, okay? That's all I'm going to say.
All right.
All right, anyways.
Bill's favorite song.
So they were seated together, and Inka says that, interestingly, she was not happy about this because apparently she had no interest in him really at all until he started talking about board games.
Oh, wow.
And that was talking her language because at that time she was really into board games as well. And they talked about board games through the entire wedding all the way until 9 a.m. German folks really know how to party, I guess.
They like their board games.
I guess so.
It's true.
Usually at weddings, I'm eating the shrimp cocktail and I'm like out at 8:30 p.m. But they were all the way until 9 a.m. in the morning. 1 week later, they had their first date where they played the Alex Randolph game, Good and Bad Ghosts. So if you recall, I mentioned Alex Randolph last episode. So he was the gaming design mentor of Leo Colovini.
Wow.
And that game was actually nominated for the Spiel des Jahres in 1982. Later in 1999, they visited the annual Settlers of Catan weekend hosted by Cosmos in Bilstein, Germany. Apparently this is a con where all they do is play Settlers of Catan for the most part. However, they were also having a designer workshop ran by Wolfgang Lockey, who isn't known for much. His most notable design is a game called Caesar and Cleopatra, which is a Cosmos 2-player game. But he was running a workshop on unpublished prototypes. And they said that they played prototypes for 3 straight days and decided that they thought they could do this. Like, I think we could design a board game.
Right, we can do better than this.
Yeah. They actually said, this doesn't seem as hard as we thought it was. It's pretty easy to make prototypes. We're going to try it. So 7 years later, they got their first published game, The Big Dinosaur Game, which was published in 2006, and it was a children's game. So that's kind of their history in board game design and meeting and all that. They currently have 3,027 games in their collection.
It's impressive.
Makes me feel better about myself.
Just a few hundred less than you, right?
Yeah, that's right. And some of their favorite games are, so Inka, her favorite game is Ticket to Ride.
Interesting.
Lenny 1.
Ooh, that's a good one.
That game just keeps coming up, doesn't it?
We need to do that on here.
We do. I think Dora Part 2, Lenny 1, or Lenny Eins, I guess, it needs to be covered. Legends of Andor, This War of Mine, which I found to be a pretty interesting choice, and Robinson Crusoe. Markus, his favorite game, he's got great taste, was Medina.
Wow.
Nice.
Another Dora game, one of my favorite games. Mm-hmm. Time's Up, Around the World in 80 Days, Pillars of the Earth, Skull King, and Pandemic. Meh.
Yeah. except for the last one.
I like Around the World in 80 Days. That's a good one.
Okay, so I think this is actually a different Around the World in 80 Days.
Oh.
I think this is a Michael Schacht Around the World in 80 Days, not Heron Tortoise Around the World in 80 Days.
Gotcha.
Yeah, different game. And that's pretty much it. Inka and Markus Brand.
That was a long book report.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Was it? Did I talk for a while?
It was. I mean, I got 2 naps in that.
You started with their birth dates.
I mean, I didn't think there was very much to go on, so I was including it all. You gotta give them an idea how old they are. You know?
Hairstyle at the wedding.
Anyways, let's get into the reviews, yeah?
Let's do it.
Sounds good. Can you see the yellow piece? No, but the blue piece must be on the second level. In ever-changing teams, 2 partners must combine their sense of observation to reproduce everything. Since their effort is timed, they will want to succeed as fast as possible for them to score the most points. Once their task is done, a new team is formed and a new task begins. Will you be one of the ones whose building skills will rise above the competition? That's it.
Such an abrupt end that was jarring.
There was.
Riveting.
There was. Content, 11 wooden pieces. One game board.
Don't do that. All right. La Boca. Published in 2013 by Cosmos and Z-Man Games. At the time of this recording, its BGG ranking is 1,612. Not too low. Designers of this game, obviously, are Inka and Markus Brand. I will mention very quickly before we get into the rules summary for La Boca, and this is slightly off topic, but I need to mention this because I've had a few people ask me about this. So this game was nominated for the Spiel des Jahres in 2013. Mm-hmm. The reason why we're reviewing it right now is because this is going to be a part of our Spiel series. Mm-hmm. And people have asked, I thought you guys were doing a series on Spiel des Jahres losers. Why are you not doing this series? Well, the reason for that is there are numerous games that are recommended and nominated every year, and so we're incorporating those games into our reviews. So there'll be a Spiel review series game every
so often.
Every 5 to 7 episodes, something like
Okay.
that. So if you want to know the hidden gems cheat codes to figuring out what games we're going to be reviewing in the future, if you just look at the nominated and recommended list for the Spiel, you're going to see what we're going to be talking about in the future. So that's one of the reasons we're reviewing it now. All right. Brief rule summary for La Boca. In La Boca, 2 players are cooperatively building a 3-dimensional structure to meet a set of specifications according to their point of view. Now, before I get into the rules, it's important to understand that La Boca is not a cooperative game, and it is not a 2-player game. Each round, 2 of the players will be randomly chosen to be partnered together to build a structure. Every player will be partnered with every other player in the game the same number of times, and they are attempting to build their structure as quickly as possible. The faster the 2 players build the structure, the more points they will both earn. At the end of the game, the player with the most points wins. So you're working with an opponent, but you're still trying to win the game. The components in La Boca consist of 11 large, chunky wooden block pieces in 11 different colors. Many having a simple 3-dimensional shape. So, for example, the simplest piece would just be a cube shape, whereas another set of pieces are rectangular, so 2 cubes side by side, whereas other pieces have an L shape or an L configuration. In between the players sits a flat 4x4 square grid and a slot for a card. At the start of each round, a card will be randomly drawn from the pile and placed into the slot. The card is placed in such a way that one side of the card is only visible to one of the players, while the other side is only visible to the other player. The card depicts the structure that the players are trying to construct within the confines of that 4x4 grid using all of the 11 wooden pieces. The trick is the picture that each player sees is only from their perspective where they are sitting. So if I'm partnered with Bill, the configuration of the color of blocks will look different to me than they will to Bill, although we're building the same structure, and that's because we're looking at it from 2 different sides of the structure, if that makes sense. So once the card is set, the players will begin to grab and quickly place the pieces, all the while communicating with the other player how they need certain pieces to look from their perspective. So any and all communication is allowed in this game. You just can't look at the other person's card, or their side of the card, obviously. The only other rules are that you must use all of the pieces and no overhangs are allowed. And that's basically it. As I mentioned before, once all players have had an equal number of turns with all of the other players, The players will then tally their scores, and most points wins the game. That is generally how you play La Boca.
La Boca.
So, as I mentioned in the rules summary, obviously the most interesting thing that's going on here is that cooperative building of a structure. But you don't have all of the information. You have the information of what the structure looks like from your side. And in fact, it is not at all uncommon in this game for you to construct the structure and be like, I'm done. It's right from my side. But you're not done because your partner's side is not correct, even though it looks right to you on your side. Okay? There's a very 2D, 3D element going on here in the game. How do y'all feel like that played out? Was that interesting? What did you think about that?
Yeah, I think that is the game, right? I think it's so simple, and yet it's fascinating how it works.
Yeah.
It maybe doesn't come through immediately in the rule summary, but because of the way the blocks are there isn't necessarily only one solution to the puzzle, right? Because the depth, it doesn't matter how far away from you each block is. It just matters that that's what you see in that position. And so there are lots of different arrangements, and sometimes there are blocks that nobody needs to see, right? But still have to be placed somewhere on the board. So it just creates a lot of really interesting puzzles, I thought.
Yeah, I think for a podcast, this is kind of difficult to describe because you do have all these Tetris pieces that are going on this 4x4 grid, and sometimes they're 4 pieces high, I guess. So there's a lot of blank pieces on the 16 spots that you have available to you. And like you're saying, Jason, there's a lot of XYZ axis kind of things going on where you have to move things towards one person or the other to make the puzzle work.
Yeah.
And it becomes a very interesting discussion that I'm seeing this piece and I can't, or we've now created a hole in the bottom, or we have this leftover piece on the side that happened a bunch. That's like, this has got to get in there somewhere, and how do we hide it kind of thing. So
and a very frantic discussion.
Right. Exactly,
because the faster you finish the structure, the more points you score, if I didn't make that clear. And so you're very frantically trying to make these decisions, and there's very much a cooperative element there for sure.
Yeah, I think it's, if you go over 2 minutes, you're just done. You score nothing.
Yeah, if you exceed 2 minutes, you're finished. If you finish within 30 seconds, you'll score a lot more than if you finish in 1:10 or whatever. So yeah, it's quick.
But it's a testament to this game, I think, that multiple times, I mean, pretty much every time, we would have people who would go over 2 minutes every so often, but you're still sitting there like, no, we're figuring this out. We're going to sit here, we're going to figure out where this extra piece goes.
Exactly. Well, it's funny, in your description of it, you kind of led with it's not a 2-player game, and it isn't. However, it feels like that every time because you're sitting down with your partner, and both of you have a task that you're trying to do, and I loved that part of this game where it felt like you two were in it together, and you're like, yeah, let's get our best score together, and it was just very much a bonding experience, I think, with everybody who's playing the game at one point or the other. So I like that.
And even when you're not playing, you still feel invested, even though you're not scoring points, because you're trying to figure out how they can do it too, without telling them, obviously. But if you're like Jason, you're sitting over everybody's shoulder like, I know what I would do.
That's right.
I know. Oh, I see it.
Right.
I know where I would place that.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what piece you need to move, and you haven't moved it yet.
It's infuriating.
I just started doing it to get on Chris's nerves, but
it was succeeding.
Yeah,
This game creates a really interesting, fun phenomenon where, at least for me, I felt like it could actually start to partially see what my partner was seeing on their side of the card. Where you will literally be talking with your opponent, you'll be pointing with your finger like, I need to see blue right here. And so you're trying to picture what they're seeing while also trying to make it work for yourself. And really, I think this game highlights how amazing the human brain is. That we can think like that. You know what I mean? That we can figure it out. There were many times where the person on the opposite side of the card solved the puzzle for the person they were sitting across from. Because they were like, oh, we need to flip it like this, right? It's just really neat how that played out, I thought.
Yeah, the changing partnership thing is really cool in this game. Just the simple mechanic of how you find out who your partner is going to be. I mean, it could have just been you rotate around and each person does the person across from them and then it rotates or something simple like that. But it's such a simple mechanic. Everybody has a set of colored chips and each person is one of those colors. And so when it's your turn, you randomly flip over one of your cards, and whichever color you flip over, that's the person you're partnered with that time. And that's such a simple thing, but it keeps things fresh. It's like, oh, I'm with Chris this time, or all right, Bill, let's go. Like, we got to make this happen, right? And that just keeps everybody engaged, and it made it fun.
Totally agree. One thing I wanted to bring up really quickly, I think this is an interesting quick discussion point, is I did hear some of the people in our gaming group say very convincingly and very assuredly that Well, I think one of the issues with this game is that some cards are just harder than other cards. Mm-hmm. This building or this arrangement is just more difficult to do than another. Mm-hmm. What do y'all think about that? Do you agree with that sentiment? Did that bother you at all? That is a possibility?
It didn't me. I'm sure that it is. And, every game has this random nature. I think there's multi-layers to this card's harder than the other. Because I think we talked about before, sometimes just your initial placement of the blocks when you lay them out there can make one card harder than another because you just start with this different mental place.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think a lot of it comes down to that initial placement. There's one really big red piece that's an L shape, which is just an awkward shape, and it takes up a lot of space. And if you try to put that out early and you get it wrong,
right,
like you could spend a whole lot of time trying to make things work around that and have that one foundational piece in the wrong spot. But it didn't really bother me, and it's so fast, 2 minutes and you're on to the next one. So yeah,
I agree. I do think it's an interesting phenomenon in games where people have a hard time divorcing themselves from an early idea. This is how I started, and it's got to work this way. And sometimes you just have to rip it up and restart, and people are resistant to do that. And I agree, Bill. Some games you're going to put down that starting few blocks exactly the way you needed to, and sometimes you're not, and that might determine whether it's easy or hard. Right. But all that to say, I just don't really care. This is a competitive game, and when we were playing it, I was trying to win, as I usually do. I mean, I like to win, but I found this game just fun to play. Right. I hesitate to use the phrase, this game is more an activity than a game. I feel like it's very cliche in board game reviewers. Mm-hmm. But you could certainly just play this game for the fun of it. In fact, my kids do it all the time. My kids will just put cards in the slot and do the puzzles. You find yourself not caring too much about who wins and loses and just enjoying putting it together. You know what I mean?
I can absolutely see that.
Yep.
You ready for final thoughts?
I'd say let's do it.
Let's go for it.
Jason, get us started.
All right. I don't think it should be any surprise from what we've already talked about that I enjoyed this game. I think this is a game that's pretty accessible to most people. If you really struggle with 3D spatial stuff, you might get frustrated at points, but they make concession for that. There are easy cards and there are hard cards, so you can start with the easy cards until you start to get the hang of it. I thought it was challenging yet fair. Like we said, there might be some cards that are slightly harder than others, but some of that comes down to just the luck of what you go for first. This game is entertaining to watch and to play, and so I think just because of the general appeal of it and just how much fun we had playing this game, I'm giving this game a 6.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Wow!
For what this game is, I think it knocks it out of the park. Right?
Yeah.
This is not the Gallerist or Venus.
Yep.
This is not meant to be a highly strategic 4-hour-long game. This is meant to be a quick playing, fun, keep everybody engaged, everybody laughing, everybody happy type game, and it knocks it out of the park for that. So. I would absolutely seek this game out just to play with my kids, play with family. I remember we wrapped up a game night early and we were just like, let's just play a couple rounds of Boca because it's fun.
Just for fun. Yeah.
That's true.
And so, for me, that's a 6.
That's awesome. Okay, cool. Follow
All
that.
Right. Yeah, really. I'm glad you gave it a 6, Jason, because this one feels like it's just such an awesome icebreaker game, right? That if you have a bunch of people who maybe don't play games, but you need to introduce each other, you do feel like you're trying to accomplish something together. It reminds me of classes I used to take 20 years ago where there was always an icebreaker where you tried to get to know everybody in the room. And something like this would just be great because you're accomplishing something together. So, I mean, I love it for that. It's funny, I'm channeling Cameron here and I'm giving it a couple scores. If you're a game collector and you're looking for a game that fits that niche that's like that, to me, I'm going to give it a 5 because it does hit it out of the park. It is an awesome game for that. One of the concerns I have about it a little bit is I wonder how much staying power it has for what it is. If you had it and played it regularly, would you come back to it? I gave it a 4 because I'm not sure how much staying power it has on the table.
Interesting. Wow. I'm reeling here. So
2.
Interesting.
It's broken.
So interesting. No. So I've mentioned before that speed style games, I don't dislike them. They're not necessarily in my wheelhouse. However, I will say that I really, really did enjoy this game a lot. For me, if I had to sum this game up in one word, it would be pleasant. It was just pleasant to play. It was enjoyable. And I think the main reason for that is This game doesn't work up overly competitive feelings. Again, you are trying to win. You are competing against everybody, but you feel such camaraderie with your shifting partnerships that you begin to just not really care about winning as much. It's just fun to do. You know, it's just fun to play the game. And so because of that, I'm going to give this game a 4. I think it's a good game. And I know compared to a 6, maybe it sounds like I didn't enjoy it. I really did. I was actually sitting here trying to decide why I didn't rate it higher. And I think it's because I guess the higher rated games for me do tend to engender in me more competitive, maybe borderline aggressive feelings, like I'm trying to really strive against my components. Feeling like I'm in agony. And this one is just enjoyable, you know? If somebody was like, let's play La Boca, I'd be like, yeah, let's play La Boca. It's fun, you know? So for that reason, I'm going to give it a 4. I think it's solid, fun game. Enjoyed it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, yes, generally a 6. And we talked about this when we did our backstage. So for anybody who wants to listen in, join our Patreon to listen to the backstage. But we talked about what makes a game a 6, right? And I think that, yeah, absolutely, I gravitate towards those harder, crunchier games. But I think in some cases, the game that makes you feel good and you would always want to come back to and play, like, why not? Right?
That's a 6.
So,
yeah, totally agree with you.
Cool.
I'm glad you did it. I think this game deserves more love for sure.
I think Chris wished he'd been a dentist instead of the.
There's not enough pain in this game. Exactly. Basically, is what I'm saying.
That's what I'm hearing.
All right. Well, those are.
Where do I find it?
Yeah, we forgot again. All right. Where can we find La Boca, Chris? Where can I find La Boca?
All right.
Are you going to sell me your copy?
I've got some bad news and some good news.
Uh-oh.
So the bad news is this game is pretty hard to find. There are no copies on Noble Knight, unfortunately. Our sponsors, our friends at Noble Knight. There are 10 copies on BGG, which is a few, but they're on the expensive side, and that's because this game is pretty rare. However, this game just got reprinted as a game called Recto Verso. It's basically the same exact game. It's just a different name. The only thing is that right now it is not available stateside. I'm pretty sure it has been widely released in European countries, so if you live there, you should be able to get it pretty easily. But Super Meeple did say that it should be available in the U.S. fairly soon. So Hidden Gems is kind of in the hotness here.
Seriously?
We kind of got ahead of the curve a little bit because I haven't heard anybody talking about this. I know. I feel icky.
You're leading us astray here.
So when all the other reviewers are talking about how awesome Recto Verso is, you can tell them, well, we heard about it as La Boca on Hidden Gems first, and you can be cool.
Exactly, a long time ago.
The board gaming hipsters. So yeah, it should be available fairly soon.
Very cool.
All right, those are our thoughts on La Boca.
La Boca.
Can you build the most prosperous city and keep it safe from pirates? Roll the dice and then strategically choose what to draw on your erasable game board. Will it be a marketplace or houses, a nobleman or a soldier? Easy to learn and fun to play combination of strategy and luck of the dice.
Erasable game board.
Yep.
That was awesome, Jason.
I know, wasn't it?
It was.
What a novel mechanism.
Mm-hmm. That was Jason's French accent, if you didn't pick it up.
Yep, that's my best French. All right. Saint Malo, published in 2012 by Alia and Ravensburger, designed, of course, by Inka and Markus Brand, and currently ranked 2,464 on BGG.
Mm-hmm. Can I interrupt you for a moment, Jason?
I suppose. I don't interrupt you when you talk.
Because you don't know this information. This game was recommended to us by one of our BGG Guild members, listeners, Andrew Holton, also known as Solid Blade. One of the best usernames in existence. I think we mentioned that on here before. It's awesome.
Nice.
So thank you, Andrew, for the recommendation. Jason thanks you. Continue.
Now I'm going to feel like an ass when I rate this game a 2. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right. In St. Malo, players will be rolling dice, Yahtzee style, in an attempt to build the most prestigious city. Each player has an erasable board, as mentioned in the lovely flavor text, which has a 7x7 grid of empty city spaces, a score track, and a few other areas for keeping track of resources, coins, etc. On a player's turn, they're going to roll 5 dice, like I said, in Yahtzee fashion, So that means they can re-roll or hold any number of the dice that they've already rolled, so long as they only roll 3 times. Once the player is satisfied, or perhaps not, as we'll find out in our review, with what they've rolled, they choose one and only one of the icons showing face up on their dice, and they perform the corresponding action for that icon a number of times according to the total number of dice that they've rolled with that icon, if that makes sense.
That was a really complicated way to say that.
Yeah, probably.
All the matching dice you do with the icon on top of that is what you do. Anyway, go ahead.
All right, listen to Bill. All right, each of the 5 dice are exactly the same and have a different icon on each of the 6 sides. So each icon has a different effect. So I'm just going to go through what those effects are really briefly here. One side of the dice has a goods crate on it. When a player chooses goods crates, they will draw the number of crates that they rolled onto orthogonally adjacent spaces on their city map. I'll come back to this as to why you might want to do that or why that's important, but I'm going to move on to the next action. The next action is wood. So a player draws a log in their lumber yard for each wood rolled, and they have to pay 2 coins for the delivery of that wood. One of the sections of a player's board is an area for coins, and you can add additional coins by drawing circles here and cross them out when you spend them. So you must spend 2 coins here in order to pay for the delivery of your wood, regardless of how many wood you actually receive. The next action is walls. So if you roll walls, then you can draw sections of wall around the outermost city spaces. Walls increase the player's defense value for their city by 2 for each completed section of wall. Mm-hmm. This is important because the next action that we're going to talk about is pirates. So each time a player ends his rolling with pirate dice showing, these don't actually allow the player to do any action. Instead, these cause marks to be added to a pirate track that is a common shared track by all players, and at certain intervals along that track, the pirates will attack. Each time the pirates attack, the strength of the attack goes up, and if a player does not have at least as much defense as the strength of the pirate attack, they must cross off one of their cannons in their city, which equals -5 points at the end of the game.
Wah, wah.
The next action is churches. When rolling churches, a player may draw a single church in one of the spaces on their map and place a number in that church up to the number of church dice that they rolled on that turn. This would be between 1 and 5. Churches score exponentially the higher the number on them. However, players may not skip numbers. So having 1 through 5 churches on your board scores a whopping 20 points. However, if you skip one of those numbers and you only have 1, 2, 4, and 5, you only get 2 churches, not 5 churches. Mm-hmm. Lastly, the last action is citizens. So the number of citizen dice rolled determines the highest tier of citizen abilities that a player can choose from. This one works a little bit differently than the other actions. But there are 5 tiers. The lowest of these requiring 1 dice with a citizen on it. The highest requiring, obviously, all 5 dice to be citizens. And depending on which tier you choose, there are different citizen types that you can draw on your board. So each citizen type corresponds to a particular letter and has a different effect depending on which citizen type it is. So for example, the lowest is just a standard normal old citizen that just scores 1 point at the end of the game. However, if you roll 5 citizen dice, you can place a nobleman out on the board. The nobleman is worth a whopping 7 points. In between these 2 tiers, there are several other citizen types that can be drawn on the board. I'm not going to go through each of them, but one that's important to mention is the merchant. Mm-hmm. I skipped over the goods crates at the beginning as to why those were important. The merchant, when placed, awards the player a single coin for every goods crate that is adjacent to him when he's drawn onto the map. And this is the only way to acquire coins throughout the game. So coins can be spent, obviously, as I explained before, to pay for wood deliveries, but they can also be spent 2 at a time in order to change any given dice to any value that the player chooses. The game ends when any player has filled in all of the spaces of their city, with the player or players who do this being awarded an extra bonus 5 points. And that is pretty much how you play Saint Malo.
That was way complicated.
Hey, I didn't have a game that only had 4 rules. I had to explain all the rules.
I understand why Chris made you explain this game.
And I skipped over a lot of stuff. So
You did.
I tried.
There's-
Tried my best.
Yeah, you did a good job.
Fast forward through that part if you don't want to listen to it. But if you're listening to me now, you probably already listened to it, so I apologize. All right. So, as I explained in the rules, this is obviously a dice chucking game. You're basically playing Yahtzee with a roll and write.
Yep.
So, we talk about dice rolling on this podcast a lot, and about how I, in particular, dislike dice rolling because of its luck factor. This game gives a couple ways to mitigate that, though, or at least one.
Yeah.
So, what did you guys think about that? Did you feel like the dice rolling was lucky? Did you feel like you had enough means to mitigate that luck? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, so I will say, I do feel like, and I think this is going to spark some interesting conversation, which I'm totally ready for. I do feel like the game does give you a lot of luck mitigation. It is possible in this game to bank a lot of coins. So as Jason mentioned in the rules, if you can get crates and you get the merchant, you can stockpile a lot of coins. And I think this game is very generous in the fact that if it wasn't clear from the rules, you can reset the face of a die to whatever you want it to be for every 2 coins you spend. And you are not limited to only doing that once. You could reset every die face that you wanted to exactly what you wanted. So essentially, if you had enough coins, you could make your roll exactly what you wanted it to be, if you had the money to do it. Which I think is pretty generous from a luck mitigation standpoint in dice rolling games. However, I will say, and I'll stop my thought here because I know that other people might comment on this, that getting the coins can be a little bit tricky because it is a 2-step process. You have to get the crates, then you have to get the merchant to get the coins, which rolling the merchant is not necessarily easy, to then have the coins to have the luck mitigation, which might be a little bit of a sticking point. So I'm kind of 50-50 on it. I don't know. What did you guys think about that?
I think it's there. We played this game enough that I got to try multiple strategies. And one of the games I went with the money strategy thinking that that's the way that I would go. I'm not sure I made great choices on when I spent my money, and I probably could have optimized it better. But from an overall strategy point of view, for you to accomplish pretty much anything you need to do, you need 2 or 3 steps at least to score big, and oftentimes more than that. And you are subject to the dice that you roll to get there.
Very much so.
And so you really have to be very fluid with what you're trying to accomplish. And what you think seems like a good strategy from an original roll you had early, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to go down this road because I'm 1 or 2 steps in that process, just may not play out. And you may spend that money and then you don't have it. I like that it's there, but it's very interesting from an execution point of view to try to make it work.
Yeah, I would agree that the mitigation is there. It's definitely there. I think that it can be challenging to get coins, like you said, Chris. I had one particular game that I feel like is worth explaining just because I feel like I should explain it. So the second or third game that we played of this, I did not manage to roll more than 2 of the same icon through the first 10 or 11 turns of the game. Right? Now you could say, well, you have coins. You start off with coins. You should have used them. Yep, except that I rolled wood and pirates. And from the rules description, I mentioned that pirates don't really give you anything. They just add to a track. And if there are pirates on your final roll, you may not change them. That's just what they are. Wood, being my only other action that I had to take, costs 2 coins to deliver.
Yeah.
So I was forced to spend 2 of my 3 coins, and 1 coin is worthless. So I was forced to spend my 2 coins to deliver wood that I couldn't use. And I don't know if I mentioned in the rules, one of the people that you can draw, the citizens, allows you to use wood to build houses that score points and yada yada, whatever. But I think that was kind of like the perfect storm of horribleness.
Yeah.
But it was just such a deflating experience because it was like, well, here we go again. I'm going to roll nothing. And the number of times I would roll the dice and just get 5 different icons and then try to pick one of those that I think is going to be the one that I'm going to roll more of. Like, surely I can roll more of this. If I hold 1 die back and then roll again and you roll all other things, it was a frustrating experience. And to not be able to get coins to do anything about that felt very punishing. So I wish there was some sort of, I don't want to say catch-up mechanism because that feels cheap, But I think there could have been other mitigation methods added to the game. Like add something in where if you forego your entire roll, like you just say, I'm not going to use any of the icons that are on my dice, but I get to increase a stat or increase an ability on an ability track that gives me some sort of ongoing ability for the rest of the game that helps me do better.
Right. Or get coins or something.
Or get coins as a consolation. Something, right? I feel like would have been helpful to prevent that situation from happening, even if it is a worst case scenario.
I was getting ready to say, I think you're making good points, but do you feel like you're maybe explaining a fringe case?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think it was the perfect storm of badness, right?
So do you feel like it's fair to judge a game based on a very low probability occurrence?
I don't know if it is that low probability.
So you're not saying it's fringe then?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think...
I'm so glad I'm over here in the bleacher seats.
I'm not going to disagree. No, I'm not going to disagree and say that it's not fringe. I think it was a unique scenario that happened.
Yeah.
But if there's a simple way to mitigate that from happening and making somebody have a miserable experience in a game, why not? It's a tiny rules tweak.
Yeah.
To fix something that could prevent somebody from hating this game after playing it the first time, right?
Sure.
So, yeah. That's my only thought on it. I don't have as much vitriol against this as I think you thought I would. But.
Yeah, I think it's dice rolling, right? And I'm not saying you did this. I wasn't paying very close attention. I don't know if you
Chris
were
is convinced that I just did something wrong in my dice roll.
Well, I mean,
rolled the
I'm
dice
going to
wrong.
raise that question. I'm not going to say that I'm sure this is what you did, but I can tell you that just generally speaking, I'm not talking about Jason's play here, that in games like this Yahtzee style, if you try too hard to shove a square peg through a round hole and you're like, I have to have citizens this turn, and you roll the dice and you roll 2 or maybe even 3 of the same thing, and you decide to re-roll that because you're just dead set on getting a certain kind of thing.
I did not do that a single time in that
Okay.
game.
I'm not saying you did.
Anything that I had 2 of, I was like, all right, I'm going to try to get more of these.
So you're telling me you rolled 3 times and you may have got 2 of the same thing on the first roll, and you never rolled another of that thing again. That's incredibly bad luck then.
At the beginning of the game, you're trying to figure out what direction you're going to go, right? And a lot of times that direction is determined by, all right, what am I doing well in, right? Like the first game we played, I rolled bananas on walls, right? I was just rolling walls. So I was like, all right, well, I'm going to crush it on the walls.
Yeah.
I'm just going to knock it out, right? Mm-hmm. This game, I was like searching for, okay, what's my thing going to be this game? What's the thing that's going to lead me off and set me off in a direction? And I never got it because I never could roll anything that was accumulating.
Yeah.
Most of the time I was rolling 5 completely different dice. So it's like, well, I'm going to randomly pick one of these to hold back, or I'm just going to re-roll everything and start from scratch, right? But that's only slightly better odds.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I think you got insanely unlucky. To be honest, I think that's...
So all I'm saying is I think that in that scenario, there's an easy way to mitigate that from happening, and it was a missed opportunity, I think.
I guess quickly, the point I'm making is, Bill, I want you to talk. I feel like we're dominating the conversation.
No, it's all good. I like it.
I'll say in games like this, one of the things I like about them, I like games where you can't come into the game night knowing what you're going to do, and I think this is an example of that. And I think where the game really gets interesting is where you start to move down a path, like you were saying, Bill, like, oh, I'm kind of doing a lot of walls here, or maybe I'm doing crates, and then maybe you get a roll that doesn't jive with that path, but it starts to jive with something else. Do you diversify your portfolio, so to speak? Not necessarily pivoting away from that strategy, but maybe dipping your hands in 2 pots, or do you pick them all up and say, hey, I'm going to press my luck and try to keep forcing my way down this path? I think those are some interesting decisions, and where you really are going to try to make your way based on how the dice are dictating your turn going, if that makes sense.
Oh, I totally agree. The jester? What was the guy that...
Oh, the juggler.
The juggler.
There's a citizen where if you can get him adjacent to a bunch of unlike citizens, he can score a crap ton of points.
Exactly, a crap ton of points. So
if you're rolling it.
If you're rolling it. And it's funny because I feel like I had a decent juggler set up. I had a place that could put a town. I even had a bunch of money, but I was waiting for something to present itself that would fall into any of those categories, and just nothing really ever happened.
So even when you felt like you could reset multiple die faces to what you wanted them to be, you didn't feel like you really had the liberty to get done what you wanted to do?
I did, because I think Well, that was the game that we were behind on walls, and you were kicking our butts with the pirates.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, exactly. So there was this whole angst about how do I handle this. There was just a lot of competing things I needed to do, and I probably left some money on the table that time. But I think I ended up going with the architect, which was good, and I think my goal at that point was try to end the game as fast as I could to limit the number of pirates that were going to attack.
To not get whacked by pirates.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned pirates. I think this is a good segue. I think we've had some good conversation, pros and cons, about just how the dice rolling Yahtzee mechanism works. But before we move into final thoughts, I do think we need to talk about the pirate attack, because this was another point that stirred up a lot of conversation and maybe some consternation. This idea of having to keep up with the pirates. So again, just to reiterate, because I know there's a lot of rules, whenever you roll cross swords, you check little boxes on a board. Once it reaches a certain point, the pirates will attack you, and if you don't have enough walls or soldiers in your city, you'll lose points. And so everybody is kind of keeping their eye on that, because -5 points in this game is pretty harsh. It can really hurt you, especially if other people aren't suffering that penalty.
Right.
What do you guys think about that mechanism? Do you feel like it added to the game or hurt it?
Felt like it added an interesting dimension to the game. I think what we debated a lot was the fact that if you fall behind in that race early, which I did in the game where I was rolling terribly, right? Because I couldn't do anything. I couldn't get walls. I couldn't get soldiers. I couldn't get anything, right? If you fall behind in that race, there's no coming back from it. So I lost...
From protecting yourself from the pirates.
Correct.
Not necessarily from maybe not winning.
Well,
maybe.
It's debatable.
Yeah, go ahead.
But, yeah. From protecting yourself from the pirates, you can't come back because the scale is always increasing. Yeah. So if you don't get a head start on that early in the game, like before the first pirate attack hits, you're probably not going to catch up because it's multiple turns of drawing walls in order to complete a whole section, which only gives you 2 defense. Right. And so like later on in the game, the pirates are coming in at like strength 10.
Yeah,
right?
6, 8, 10, yeah.
Yeah. So I finished that game where I rolled poorly with like -25 points, right? Which in a game where a winning score is 65 points, that's game over. And I know what your argument's going to be, Chris, which is that, well, then just don't focus on defense at all and just go whole hog and roll all kinds of other good things and score lots of points. And
that's a great point.
You can mitigate it. Such a great point. Didn't I make a great point, guys? And I don't disagree. It's not a terrible point. However, that assumes that you're actually rolling things that score you points that you can put on the board, which I was not. But go ahead, Chris.
No. I want to hear what Bill has to say.
Yeah, let's hear from Bill.
So it is really super interesting. If you think about the maximum number of times the pirates are going to attack, there's probably going to be between 4 and 5, which is between 20 and 25 points. If you allocate and go after the church, for instance, that gets you 20.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a huge thing to accomplish, especially if you have
getting all 5 churches. That's a huge thing to accomplish. That would take like the whole game, and that just gets you back to 0.
Well, true.
The whole game.
I'm not saying that the church is necessarily easy, but if you set aside enough money, that's just one way to do it. I'm half in Chris's camp. I think it's worth a few more plays because I do think there may be a way that you could match it and not spend that much on the pirates.
You're not going to convince me to play this game that many more times to find out.
I will say I'm very torn about the pirates because I know in one of the games that we played, both Bill and Jason, just out of rolling, again, this is luck of the rolls, kind of fell behind on the walls, and I was rolling walls. And I actually saw an opportunity. I think this is an interesting strategic point where I was actually trying to roll swords.
Right.
Which don't do anything for me, but I'm like, well, if I can make them both take a -5 ding and they're falling farther behind on the pirate track, why not, right? And it really brought the game down, and I'm not saying that as an accusation against you both, but it did deflate it a little bit because it just feels so abusive, for lack of better. It's very punishing, you know, because not only are you getting -5, but the reality is setting in that I'm going to continue to get -5 multiple times over the course of this game, most likely.
Right.
Now, can that be overcome if I just say, screw it, I'm not worrying about pirates, and I'm just going to try to score points the other way?
I don't think you have the time.
I don't know. I think so. This is a game I needed to play more.
I mean, the highest scoring potential, aside from the accumulating points on churches, the highest scoring potential, I think, is building a nobleman which is 7 points.
Yeah.
Right?
Or the architects, you can score a lot of points too, though.
I know, but those are 5 dice that are all the same rolls to do that, right? At least the nobleman is.
No, the architect's 3. Building a lot of buildings, I mean, you do that twice, that's 18 points, right? I don't know. I think it's possible, but I will say that you got to be careful with this game because I could see how it could just totally take the air out of the room in a group if they get nailed by pirates.
We had a lot of colorful words as Chris was executing that strategy. we were not
gleefully doing it too.
Right.
I love it. I'd say we move into the final thoughts here. I think we've been bantering enough, don't you think?
All right.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Bill, kick us off here.
Okay. In general, I enjoyed this game, except when Chris was kicking our ass with the pirates. I will reiterate that to score in any particular strategy, you do need several turns of the dice to go the way that you wanted it to go. In some plays that happens, sometimes it doesn't. And it can be really frustrating when a third strategy appears when you've really been working on 2, and it's just a lot of effort to do it.
Sure.
One thing I will mention is this game did come out in 2012. I did watch a Dice Tower review in 2013 that was talking about how they thought this writing was really gimmicky and it'll never catch on. And they were saying they're coming up with... So they're coming up with ways is like, why would you do this instead of using tokens? Have they never heard of printing tokens? It's like, well, maybe you could travel on a plane and do it or something like that. So, yeah, it is kind of funny to see how the roll and write has kind of taken off. But when it comes to a drawing game, I think I've recently gotten cartographers and enjoyed that. I would probably reach for cartographers. Or in the building things where I'm using shapes and putting things together, I would reach for tiny towns. So, anyway, with all that said, I gave this game a 3 because it felt kind of punishing to play, and I would not be really super excited about playing it again.
Did you say punishing?
I said punishing.
Sounds like a 6 is coming from Chris.
Oh, man, you're speaking my language, Bill.
It was especially brutal because the punishing was coming from Chris.
All right. So as Bill mentioned, when this game came out, it was a novel concept. The idea of roll and write was new.
Right.
And it was exciting, and a lot of people were excited about it. I think a lot of this game's cult following, which it does have a bit of one, I know this is one of Z Garcia's favorite games, or at least it was for a while, was because of that. But as you mentioned, Bill, the roll and write genre has expanded significantly, almost to a fault. There are so many now. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of good ones. And you mentioned cartographers, and I agree with you. I also have played cartographers, and I think Cartographers is a much better game than this. 3 out of 4 times, I would rather play Cartographers. But the thought I come back to, and this is an interesting thought, maybe this will be a backstage topic one day, but what about the 4th time? You know? Just because a game is superior to another game, does that mean that I always must play Cartographers if I want to play a roll and write? I don't think so. You know? There's this idea amongst board game reviewers. Tom Vassell mentions this a lot. He says, games that canceled other games. Like, well, because this game exists, I no longer will play this game. Or this is the only game I'll reach for when I want to play this kind of game. And I just don't agree with that. I like variety. Mm-hmm. I like a mixture of things. And yeah, I would rather play Cartographers, but there might be some nights where I want to play St. Malo. And that's okay, even if it's maybe an inferior game.
This is why Chris owns 4,000.
Exactly. Basically, I'm justifying why my collection is so huge, okay? I need variety, people. I don't want to play the same game all the time. So all that to say, I think the game is good. I don't think it's great. I think it's good. I enjoyed it. I'm going to give this game a 4 also. I would like to play it every now and then. So there you go.
Cool. Despite my making fun of you, I do agree with you. I don't think that games necessarily need to be canceled just because a game that uses the same mechanism and maybe does it slightly better comes out. Yeah. Definitely don't think that. Now, when it comes to St. Malo, I like the roll and write aspect of this game, and I wanted to like it more because I do enjoy a lot of the more modern roll and writes. I don't think it lives up to it, and I don't think it lives up to it enough even for it to be variety in my book. I think there are too many rough edges to this that create a negative experience that benefits maybe 1 or 2 people, but at the expense of somebody having a miserable time, perhaps. And I realized that that was me in one game that we talked about at length. That is not the only reason why I'm giving this game a low rating, though. If this was just a roll and write game and it used some of the same mechanisms, I think it could be fun. But one of the things that makes modern roll and writes interesting, I think, is that many of them use the idea that everyone shares the same fate, right? A card gets flipped over and everybody has to figure out what to do with it.
Right.
Dice get rolled and everybody has to figure out what to do with that and has to figure out how to mitigate that equally.
Yeah.
In this game, I'm rolling my own dice.
Yeah.
Chris is rolling his own dice. Chris might roll his own dice great, and I might roll my own dice crappy. And there's nothing that I can do about that. In these other games, they get around that by everyone sharing that, and it creates this situation of like, well, everybody's dealing with the same stuff, and then you get to see how everyone handled it differently and did it in different ways. And I think that's just such a more interesting way to handle this luck mitigation stuff that everyone has to deal with it, right? So I struggled between a 2 and a 3 with this one. I'm going to settle on a 2 because I really just didn't enjoy it, honestly.
Yeah.
I could see giving it a 3 because I think that there are people who are going to enjoy this, and it was novel for its time and all of that, yada, yada, right? But for me, I just didn't enjoy it. And that, again, please hear that this is not just because I rolled really badly one game, right?
You believe in it?
No.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about it is I feel like it would become very samey over time, right? Because the only thing that's different is, like, what am I rolling each time? And for me, and for me, a lot of times it's like, well, whatever I roll the most of, that's what I'm going to do, right? Because that's the most lucrative thing to do, unless you have a ton of coins.
But you can't keep consistently rolling the same thing every roll.
No, you can't.
Pivot sometime.
Exactly. No, right, which is why I'm saying you're just going to do the action of whichever thing you roll the most of.
See, I don't agree with that either, because I think...
I'm not saying exclusively.
There's that decision point.
There is a decision point.
I rolled 2 wood or 3 wood even. Am I going to throw it in the trash and really try to roll this thing I want now, or I'm going to keep it? I don't know. I think there's decisions there.
Yeah, whatever. 2.
Maybe a 1.
What we've all learned here is just don't take Jason to Las Vegas to the craps table.
Oh, dude, I love craps. Craps is the best Vegas game
With the way you roll dice?
Well, yeah, I do roll dice terribly, which is why I don't play craps very often. But the few times I've played, I really enjoy it. So I don't hate dice, people.
All right. Well, if any of this piqued your interest, there are some copies available at Noble Knight, but they're not very cheap, unfortunately. But you can get it there. You can use our discount code 22GEMS, get 10% off your order. There are also 12 copies available on the BGG Marketplace as well.
All right. Those are our thoughts on Saint Malo.
Guatemala. Fertile coast areas, tropical rainforests, and volcanic highlands run from the Pacific Ocean to the Caribbean Sea. Coffee growers cultivate plantations where they harvest the aromatic black gold. The plantations expand quickly, the crops become more and more profitable, and the earnings increase. After a short while, trade routes cross the entire region, and big cargo ships lie in the harbor, ready to export the coffee to Europe. Exciting.
We've just been blown it out of the water with the flavor text this episode.
That's right. I'm not going to be the one responsible for getting us canceled, so there we go. All right. Guatemala Café, published in 2006, going back, by Rio Grande Games and Eggert Spiele. At the time of this recording, its BGG ranking is 4,898.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right? Designers, again, Inka and Markus Brand. Brief rule summary for Guatemala Café. This will be as brief as I can. This game is not complicated, but difficult to explain.
Yes.
I'll just mention right off the bat, it's a shared incentives game. We've been on a roll lately. This was not necessarily intentional, but it just so happened that this was a shared incentives game. So here we go. Guatemala Café is a game of shared incentives, where the players are building up competing coffee farms on a shared board, all the while looking for opportunities to leech off of others' hard work in order to turn the largest profit for themselves. The play area in Guatemala Café consists of 2 separate boards, the production area board and the farm board. The production area board is a 9x9 gridded board that is randomly populated at the start of the game with storage sheds, workers, ships, and coffee bags in 5 different colors. A track is also present around the edge of the board upon which a gray buyer pawn will move. So basically this is a giant rondelle where this pawn is going to be moving around the edge of this very large 9x9 gridded board. On a player's turn, they can take one of 3 actions on this production area board. They can move the buyer pawn 1 to 3 spaces clockwise and then purchase between 1 to 3 farm pieces. Again, these are sheds, workers, ships, and roads. From the row or column that the buyer pawn is currently standing in. Secondly, they can move the buyer pawn 1 to 3 spaces clockwise and then pick up the lone coffee bag in that row or column to trigger a scoring, or they can pass their turn. If the player chooses to buy farm pieces, those pieces are placed on the farm board by the player in order to establish their farms. The farm board is also gridded and consists of 4 separate paths along which the players will establish their farms. This board is also separated into 4 separate regions. The harbors at one end of the board where purchased ships are placed, and then 3 different terrain type areas. It's important to understand that the terrain types that are further from the harbor are cheaper to build in than the ones that are closer to the harbor. When a player places a storage shed of a given color and places at least 1 worker of the same color adjacent to that shed, the player now has a working farm that can score points. If this farm is directly and continuously connected to its harbor by way of roads placed along its corresponding path, and a matching color ship is present in the harbor, the player's score will be increased by 2x, 3x, or even 4x, depending on the number of same colored boats present in the harbor. If instead of buying pieces, the player chooses to move the buyer pawn 1 to 3 spaces and then trigger a scoring, they pick up the coffee bag in that row or column, and then all farms matching that color of coffee bag will score points. So farms, which again are sheds plus number of connected workers, will score a number of points equal to the number of workers connected to the shed. So if you've got a shed and 3 workers connected in a line to that shed, that's 3 points. However, if the farm is connected to its harbor by roads and there is a matching color boat in that harbor, that base score is multiplied by 2, all the way up to 4 if there are 3 boats there. After scoring, the player will then choose a new bag to place on the now vacated coffee bag spot on the production area board from a hand of 6 coffee bags that they were randomly dealt at the start of the game. In addition, and this is very important, they will gain 8 centavos, or 8 money, for triggering a scoring. This is the only way that money is ever gained in this game. And again, you need money to buy things to build your farms. It's also important to note that every time a coffee bag is scored, it is placed on the scoring track starting at 50, with each newly scored bag being placed 1 step closer towards 1 on the score track. So next bag would be placed on 49, then on 48, etc. Once a single player's scoring marker passes a coffee bag on the score track, the game will end. And at this point, the player with the highest total points will win the game. And that's generally how you play Guatemala Café.
Awesome.
Well done.
That make any sense? I sure hope so.
Well, we have a bit of a unique review tonight for Guatemala Café, and that's because this is our first Patreon backer review. Mm-hmm. So for anyone who's not aware, for our highest tier of Patreon backers, our $15 backers, these backers get once per year a review of their choice that they will work with us on directly to decide on a particular game that they'd like to see reviewed on the show. And then they get to participate in the review by sharing their thoughts that we get to read out on the air. And so rather than just doing our normal thing that we do with our reviews and then just reading a giant paragraph of thoughts, we thought we would mix it up a little bit and start with the thoughts from our Patreon backer, Paul S. And that we would...
Also known as Last Game on the Left on Instagram.
That's right. So we thought we would just start with his thoughts and kind of discuss based on some of the points that he raised. So,
exactly. So yeah, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read one of the pros, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
Okay.
So his first point is, in the pros, he says, I like the collusion on how players benefit from having the same coffee type when someone takes the scoring action. Also, the player on the lower parts of the map are keen on scoring repeatedly before the road connects with the other farms. Jason, I think you had this experience in one of our games, especially the second point that he makes there. What did you guys think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because money is super tight in this game.
Oh, yeah.
And as Chris explained, the only way to get money is to trigger a scoring. And I mean, you don't get a ton of money by doing that. And yet, some of these farm spaces that are close to the harbor are real expensive.
Mega expensive.
Right? I mean, it's $6 or 6 centavos, I guess, in order to just place a shed there. And then every worker that you want to put next to it is another 3. And so to get any degree of presence there just seems so expensive, especially early in the game. And so we were debating after our first couple plays of this game of like, is that even a viable strategy? It just seems like you would just be killing yourself early on in the game to even try for that. But if you don't go early after that, then you lose all the benefit of it, because if you don't actually score anything from it until everyone else has managed to connect their roads into yours, then you're not really benefiting any more than anybody else at that point. So I gave it a shot one time. I was like, I'm just going to try it. I'm just going to see if it works. And surprisingly enough, I won that game.
It worked for you, yeah.
It worked out. I only managed to actually score it one time, though, without anyone else benefiting from it, which was interesting.
But it was enough. That boat scoring is significant.
Yeah, I think I had one boat down there, maybe two. I might have gotten two boats down there. Yeah, it's interesting. But that whole leeching off of people is a constant threat. Whether you're doing that strategy or any other strategy, it's interesting because it only takes a couple roads for somebody to link into the next closest farm.
Right.
And so you're always looking at, oh, where's Bill going to place his farm? Because I know if he places there, he's going to start building roads, and then it's easier for me to connect my road in. And yeah, I thought
that's the beauty of shared incentives too, right? Because in that particular game, Garrett did a really good job of, he recognized that, okay, Jason is building brown farmers very close to the harbor in very expensive spaces. Basically, Jason is proclaiming to the table, I am intending on scoring brown on this path. That's obvious. Otherwise, he wouldn't be building there. And Garrett also took brown workers and tried to latch on to Jason.
He took all my workers.
He did.
He almost killed me in that game.
Yeah. Yeah. But you were able to hook in and at least get some of that scoring before he did. But I think that speaks to the interestingness of the shared incentives. Is one of the interesting parts of this game is when you see somebody invested in something, a particular color, and you can tell they are really trying to score that, you can just jump on with them because you know they're going to be building the roads for you. If Bill has a 5-size white farm and I have a 3-size, well, Bill's getting a little bit more of a scoring benefit than I am, but I don't let him do all the work. I'll let him build all the roads because he's more incentivized to see white score than I am, and I'm just kind of leeching off of him, right? I like that aspect in games like this.
Oh, I do too. It's an interesting challenge to diversify yourself enough so that you are not parallel with the same person. You need to distribute it across the other players at the table so that you can have a chance to win and get it across the table.
So just to read another one of Paul's points, kind of in the vein of what we were talking about before, he said the trade-off between doing actions or scoring income is interesting. The latter can be difficult if you're making your opponent score points just to get your much-needed income. Money is so tight in this game, and in order to get money, it often entails causing your opponents to score points, right? To trigger scoring you may not be invested in. But that's not always a bad thing, right? Because maybe you're scoring them before their economy is built up. Also, scoring allows you to put a bag of your choice out on the table.
Right.
You know? What do you guys think about that?
You get to score them before maybe they get that extra boat and place it down in front of them. Yep.
And I feel like we were seeing that. I think it was in your game, Jason. People were feeling threatened by your brown farm, and people were trying to pull those brown sacks off the board before you connected to that boat, right? Because that threat of, he's going to score it eventually. Let's try to get that scoring potential off the board, right?
Right, without the multipliers.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of strategy to that, I think, especially early game, because you know you're going to run out money later, and thinking about the ones that you have in your hand and the colors that you think you're going to go for. It's an interesting point on which bags you get when, kind of all the way through the game.
Yeah. So one more quick pro here from Paul. I think this is an interesting point too. He says, placing the workers bit does remind me of some games like Through the Desert or Oasis, which we've also reviewed on this podcast. The map gets tighter faster than I thought as you populate it with workers. More tension if farm types of the same color are next to each other. Again, reminding me of Through the Desert. So if it wasn't clear from the rules, two of the same color of farm cannot merge. And so what Paul is saying here is that makes the board even tighter because it limits the places where you can build of a certain color if a farm of the same color is near you. What do you guys think about that placing out of workers and how you can use that offensively to kind of block people?
I like that, except for when Chris was being a jerk to me and deliberately blocking all of my spaces.
Boxed him in.
One thing that I did find interesting, I don't know that it's a problem, but I found it interesting, is that it seems like there are some definitively better positions on the board, even in the same tier, especially the level 6 farms. There's one that is right next to the cheaper land to build workers, right? Whereas the others are much more deeply ingrained in 6 territory.
Right.
And so I don't know that that's necessarily a problem, but it creates a race type situation where somebody might just get a better spot on the map that is objectively better because the spaces around it are cheaper than somebody else simply because of turn order or because of the fact that they went earlier or something like that. But I found it to be an interesting puzzle of trying to figure out, okay, how can I place my workers in the best way so that I'm being defensive and creating a line where other people aren't going to encroach on my territory?
Yeah. And to Paul's point, even maybe placing your workers in such a way that I block your advancement to where Jason can't even place in those cheaper real estate areas, and I've kind of walled them off to myself. Or even better, place my workers in such a way where I've smothered him, right? Mm-hmm. At most, he can place 3 or 4 workers because he just has no more room to place, right? You can do that in this game, which can be pretty vicious.
Yep.
So it's funny because this line of questioning brings me to the thought that this is one of those games that have a lot of serendipitous moments, right? I mean, there's lots of discovery of, hey, you can do this, or, oh, crap, this just happened to me. It was just interesting to me, the whole discovery process of that. And watching the people block in, it's like, oh, I put this here. I did not realize I could get blocked off in the way that I could. Certainly every few turns there was a moment of discovery to me. It's like, wow, there's something else here to learn. So
for as mean as this game can be, and it can be, you can also save yourself in this game, and I think a lot of it has to do with those ships. Those ships are game changers.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
And I think that was something that we were just still learning. There's so much strategy in the ship of trying to grab that ship and get those multipliers. That's the obvious thing, right? I have a brown farm. I want brown ships to multiply my score. But there's also the idea of, do I buy this brown ship and I don't even have brown farms to deny these people from getting that multiplier? That's a good play. Or even better yet, do I take this brown ship, which I don't need, and then place it in a port where only red and white farms are running, and thereby taking up a harbor space where they can't place white or red boats, right?
Or do I hold off on buying this ship because I know if I buy the ship and I put it in a harbor, somebody else is going to score that color before I'm ready for them to.
Exactly.
And make it not worth it nearly as much as I want it to be.
Or if I buy a ship super early and show my hand early, is everybody then just going to immediately leech on to me because they now are incentivized to buy into brown because they know it's now valuable.
Right, and take all your workers away from
which
you.
means there's workers.
So they end up getting more multipliers than you do.
The tightness of the workers was surprising to me the first game we played. I was like, oh, man, there are only 7 workers of this color.
Right.
Like, I got 3 of them, and then all the rest of them are gone because everybody's like, ooh, black farms are on the board. I'm going to go get all the workers for that.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
So I have a question. I really thought that the 2-board layout was really unique in the way that you got your resources. It was almost like a mini game to itself going around the track. To me, fascinating to think about, especially when it was even 2 or 3 turns away from you and doing the math, because you can move the token on the first board that chooses your resources 1 to 3 spaces. So you can kind of guess the range that you're going to be in and just kind of mathing it out what's going to work out. But anyway, I just thought that first board was an interesting game in and of itself. And
the production board, you mean? Where you're getting your materials to place in the farm board.
Exactly.
Yeah, so this is a nice segue. So Paul, in his cons, actually, so this will be a good discussion.
Yeah.
He said, I'm not really feeling the action selection. And he said he felt like it was rather tactical and too chaotic. It's hard to plan until it's your turn or the player on your right's turn. And he mentions here that he only played it with 4 players. So I guess the point that he's making is, this is a rondel, but it's a huge one.
Right.
Yep.
It's big, okay? So, Bill, you've been speaking a little bit to this, and it didn't seem to bother you too much. And it almost seems like you're suggesting that you felt like you could time it or guess roundabout where you thought it might land. But how did you feel about it, Jason? Did you feel like it was just too large to control? Do you agree with Paul? What did you think about that rondel there?
Yeah, I think I fall somewhere in the middle. I do agree with Bill that I think you can start to understand, okay, well, I'm generally going to be in this region. You can start thinking ahead of like, okay, well, if Chris does this, then I might be able to land in this general area, and I'm going to try to get these things. At the same time, because it's such a huge ring, simply based on what other players choose to do, there could be whole regions of the ring that you're just never going to have a chance to choose from. And that feels difficult because it's like, well, I really need that row right there, but there's just no way based on turn order that I'm ever going to have the opportunity to land within that range on the board, right? And that can be punishing if the pieces in that area are the things that you really, really need. So, I don't know. I think I fall somewhere in the middle.
I think I agree with you, but maybe for a slightly different reason. This is interesting to hear your thoughts. For me, I agree with Paul in that the rondel is so large that you really just can't plan. When you take a turn, be like, okay, on my next turn, I'm going to land in this column and take these things. There's just too much that can happen in between your turn.
Of course.
But I rarely in these games found myself thinking, okay, on my next turn, I have to have those things. And I think that's just because this game is so strongly tied to shared incentives. In a 4-player game, if I just take my turn, what the 3 people after me do on their turn before I take my next turn is infinitely important.
Right.
Right? What I thought I might want might completely change after they take their 3 turns because of the shared incentives nature of the game, right? What somebody chooses to get into or not changes what I'm going to do. So I think the game is very tactical, and I think you're not really thinking a whole lot about, okay, on my next turn I need this. I was more thinking, okay, what are they going to do?
Right.
And then now, based on what they have all just done, what should I do now based on what's available to me? What am I incentivized to do now? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally agree.
I agree with that. We need to talk about the end game. But if I had a qualm about this game, it's the end game.
Yeah.
And that's mainly because they tried to make this such a pure shared incentives mechanic.
Very much so.
That I struggled with the end game because the way the game ends is through player agency, right? So the game will only end if players score enough things.
They decide it's over, yeah.
And decide that the game's over.
Right.
And I wish that they had tweaked it slightly. I know I'm throwing out a lot of like rules tweaks here, suggestions, and that's always dangerous, but I really think it could have improved this game to have some sort of timer where if players don't take a scoring action on a full round or something, a coffee bag goes out on the board and slowly ticks away to force the game in, because we would get to the end and it would be like somebody's marker is 1 space away from crossing the bags, and it just becomes this knife fight of who's going to be the one who's run out of money and can't do anything else and has to grab a scoring bag, because by that point in the game, you're so tightly tied to everyone else from a scoring perspective.
You're going to move somebody else up.
That scoring something is going to move other people up.
Yes.
And so you're like, well, I don't want to score that one because that's going to move Chris past me. I don't want to score that one because that's going to move Bill past me. So I'm stuck 1 point away from the end and can't do anything about it.
So I'm just going to pass.
So I'm just going to pass. And then I'm still going to lose because the person after me is incentivized to score one of those other colors because they know they're going to jump across and win. And I don't know, that deflated the end of it for me a bit. That and the fact that it came down to, I think in 2 of our games that we did, I think it was Garrett both times, it came down to the person who had that opportunity was basically making a king-making decision.
Yeah.
Of like, well, am I going to score this color and this person wins, or am I going to score this color and that person wins?
There was one game for sure, Garrett definitely decided the winner. It was between me and Bill, and the decision he made caused Bill to end up winning the game. But I will say...
He chose correctly.
It chose correctly. It didn't seem vicious or vindictive. I think in that moment, Garrett realized that he couldn't win no matter what he did. And so he made the play that caused him to finish as best as he could.
Mm-hmm.
And in those situations, if you find yourself in that situation where you realize, well, crap, I can't win, that just means that you just got outplayed, right? And if I take that a step further, if you find yourself on the bad end of the king-making, quote-unquote, decision where, oh, well, he picked Bill instead of me, maybe Bill just did a better job of being incentivized with more people and put himself in a better position to win at the end of the game. That doesn't necessarily bother me. Again, I don't consider that to be king-making. Now, if Garrett have chosen an action or a move that would have been not good for him from a points perspective, but he picked Bill just because he didn't want me to win, that's king-making, and I just say don't play with people like that. You know what I mean? But I didn't feel like that's how it played out with us, and it didn't necessarily bother me, although I understand all the points that you're making.
Yeah. It just felt a little less satisfying than it maybe could have been.
It was weird. We had like 3 full rounds of we were just playing chicken with each other. There was a lot of weird posturing going on.
There was, but I could easily see another game that we were trying to prolong it long enough so that we would be the ones who would get to decide, right? And there would be a distinctive winner. Mm-hmm. And so I think everybody, including me, I was trying to keep you from winning, from getting across line. So the
likewise,
right, exactly. So the strategy was to make sure the token went past you so that you couldn't win.
Yeah.
And so to me, I thought that made great gaming, right?
Agreed. All right. Shall we move on to final thoughts?
Let's do it.
Okay. I'll start with Paul. And then I guess I'll go and then we'll go around the table here. So here's Paul's final thoughts. Unfortunately, I haven't played this one enough, so it's all first impressions. My feeling, though, is that I'd rather just play something like Santiago. I think that game executes the ideas I like from Guatemala Café better. Chicago Express for the player alliances. Through the Desert, or Babylonia, for the spatial gameplay, as you mentioned earlier. I still thought that Guatemala Café had those interesting ideas in it, but alas failed to achieve their potential. I won't turn it down outright, it's just that I got several choices. Based on Hidden Gem's rating system, I'll give it a 3 out of 6.
Wow, I'm surprised.
Yeah. Paul calls it straight, man. He doesn't pull any punches.
Yeah.
Interesting. So for me, this game is as close to a 5 as you can possibly get for me. But it's not. I'm going to give it a 4. It deserves a 5. But I'm not going to give it a 5. I'm going to give it a 4. And I'm giving it a 4 because I suck at this game. I mean, I just can't figure it out. No matter what I do in this game, I always seem to hitch my wagon to the wrong horses in this game. And it just frustrates the heck out of me. Is that a fault of the game? No. And that's why I'm saying it probably deserves a 5. But part of our rating is how much we enjoy it. And this game just drove me insane. Because I never felt like I got on the right horse. You know what I mean? I'd be like, okay.
Because everybody was picking on you, Chris?
No. This is me just making bad decisions. And I think a lot of that is this game is very shared incentives. This might be the most shared incentivist of all shared incentive games we've ever played, with maybe the exception of King Chocolate, and I think maybe this one even more so. I mean, everything you do in this game just centers around shared incentives, I feel like.
Yeah.
The rondelle, as I mentioned, there's no strategy in that necessarily. It's just all tactical play based on how am I going to leech off of somebody now based on how the board state has changed between my last turn. Right? I think all that's good. All I have to say, I think this is a good game. It's solid. I'm giving it a 4. I'm just bad at it. Which makes me not want to reach for it maybe as readily as some other games, but I think it's solid. If you like shared incentive games, play this game. That would be the moral of the story for me.
Yeah, I think you summed up my thoughts with your last point there. This is shared incentives through and through.
Oh my gosh.
And if you enjoy that type of thing, you owe it to yourself to try this game. I enjoyed Guatemala City. I think it is a fun take on the shared incentives mechanic. There are some things that I wish were different about it. The end game in particular felt a little lackluster, a little awkward. But there were some tough decisions all throughout this game. The shared incentive piece makes it interesting. Shared incentives, I don't think, are my favorite type of game out there.
Me either. Yeah.
I don't know. There's something about them that it's not the direct competition necessarily. I think it feels difficult to know how to forge a path ahead because you're so tied to everybody else, and that's the whole point.
Yep,
right?
I totally agree.
But
You summed it up well. It feels weird to score points when you're pulling other people along with you, especially if they're getting more than you, right?
Right. And that's not a bad thing. That's just a shared incentive game, and I think maybe they're just not my cup of tea. Or cup of coffee, I guess it is in this game, right? But I did enjoy this game for what it was. And so I settled on a 4 for this game.
Nice.
Well, I guess there's a common theme because I'll agree that shared resources games are not intuitive to me. But again, like I was saying earlier, there were so many moments in this game that was kind of serendipitous to me. That's like, oh yeah, this works. Oh yeah, this works. There was just like one discovery after another. I don't know how long that would last because I'm starting to get to the point where I'm thinking, well, this would probably be the way that would be the best way to play it. But I would need to play it a few more times to get that. I was playing with giving it a 5 as well, but I'm going to give it a 4 because it was good enough, but it's just not a 5 category.
Interesting. 4s all around, which guts me even more because I feel like this game is worthy of a 5. I don't know. I think it's what you were saying, Jason. It's just so shared incentive that unless you're just over the moon for those games, I don't think it's going to grab you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's very much that way. All right. Well, if any of this sounded interesting to you, there are very reasonably priced copies available at Noble Knight. Again, you can get it there with our discount code 22GEMS. Get 10% off your order. And there are also 26 copies on the BGG Marketplace for as low as $15. Pretty darn cheap. So if any of this sounded interesting to you, you can give it a try pretty easily.
All right. Well, those are our thoughts on Guatemala Café.
Mm-hmm.
And we just want to throw out, again, a special thanks to Paul S.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, for his
Thanks,
thoughts. It was fun to do this, fun to get his thoughts, and to be able to riff off that in our review. If this sounds interesting to you and you want to participate and want to see a game that you're interested in reviewed on the show and get to participate with us in that review, you can join us on our Patreon at what is our Patreon?
Patreon.com.
At patreon.com/hiddengemspodcast. So check it out if this sounds interesting to you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Hidden Gems. If you're enjoying what we're doing on the podcast, and we hope that you are, please remember that it's a huge help to us when folks like yourselves give us a rating or review on the various podcast platforms out there, or when you follow us on social media. If you're so inclined, please consider supporting the show, like we said, over on our Patreon at patreon.com/hiddengemspodcast. Check out our BGG Guild if you'd like to interact with us, or you can share a game that you feel is a hidden gem. Until next time, I'm your host, Jason.
This is Bill.
And this is Chris.
Thanks for listening.
This episode of Hidden Gems, number 38, was recorded in Raleigh, North Carolina on August 30th, 2022. Join us again in 2 weeks when we are joined by fellow board game content creator John Cox from John Gets Games. We will be reviewing 3 games that John thinks are true hidden gems. Will we agree with him? Tune in to find out. Hidden Gems is produced and edited by Chris Alley, Cameron Lockey, and Jason Yanchuleff. Our Board Game Geek Guild is monitored and managed by honorary Hidden Gems team member Ghidorah. Our show's logo was illustrated by designer and artist Katelyn Nieto. Check out her work on Instagram at It's Katelyn Nieto. We would love to hear from you. Feel free to join the discussion on our many social media accounts. You can find us on Facebook at Hidden Gems Board Game Podcast, Instagram at hiddengems.podcast, and Twitter at Hidden Gems Board. Disagree with one of our reviews? Have something you want to say about one of the games we discussed today? You can also make your voice heard on our Board Game Geek Guild at BoardGameGeek.com, Guild number 3874. Once again, thank you for joining us on Hidden Gems, and until next time, fellow gem seekers, enjoy your games and enjoy your search.